Sometimes the hardest part of losing everything isn't starting over. It's believing you deserve another chance. Hollis Trent knew that feeling well. At 46, divorced and barely scraping by, he'd gone from teaching music to fixing broken faucets just to pay rent. His daughter lived with his ex-wife, and every missed weekend visit felt like another piece of his heart chipping away. Then he heard about a filthy abandoned villa the county was selling for $1. His family thought he'd lost his mind. Neighbors called it a waste of time, but Hollis bought it anyway. While cleaning out the trash-filled rooms, he found a hidden door beneath the floorboards. What was inside changed everything. Would it be enough to bring his family back together? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The apartment where Hollis Trent lived wasn't much to look at. A studio on the third floor of a building that had seen better days, with pipes that groaned in the winter and a window air conditioner that rattled all summer long. The walls were thin enough that he could hear Mrs. Tanaka's television through the plaster, and the carpet had stains from tenants he'd never met, but it was cheap, and cheap was all he could afford these days. He kept his toolbox by the door, a battered red Craftsman that had belonged to his father. Every morning he'd check his phone for messages from the handyman service he'd signed up with 3 years ago. Small jobs mostly, leaky faucets, stuck windows, ceiling fans that wobbled, the kind of work that paid $40 an hour if he was lucky, minus the service's cut. It hadn't always been this way. There was a photograph tucked into the corner of his bathroom mirror, held in place with a piece of yellowed tape. In it, a younger Hollis stood beside a grand piano in a high school auditorium, his arm around a 12-year-old girl with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. She was holding a certificate, grinning at the camera with the kind of unself-conscious joy that only children possess. That was Ainsley, his daughter, the day she'd won second place in the regional piano competition. He'd been so proud that day he thought his chest might burst. That was 14 years ago, back when he'd been a music teacher at Riverside High School, back when he'd had a house with a yard and a wife who still looked at him with something other than disappointment, back when his life had made sense. The divorce had come slowly, then all at once. Years of small tensions, money worries, different visions for the future, the weight of his mother-in-law's constant criticism had accumulated like sediment in a river until one day the current couldn't flow anymore. His ex-wife, Beatrice, had wanted stability. She'd wanted him to leave teaching, to get a real job with better pay and benefits. She'd wanted him to be practical. But Hollis had loved teaching, loved watching kids discover Coltrane for the first time, loved seeing their faces when they finally understood chord progressions, loved the spring concerts and the jazz band performances, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing he'd helped someone find their voice. In the end, it hadn't been enough. The marriage had ended 8 years ago, and somehow he'd lost more than just his wife. He'd lost the house in the settlement, lost his confidence. And when budget cuts hit the school district 2 years later, he'd lost his job too. Now Ainsley was 24, living downtown with a life of her own. She worked in marketing for a tech company, made more money than he ever had, and saw him maybe once a month if he was lucky. Their conversations had become stilted, full of long pauses and safe topics. She loved him, he knew that, but there was a distance between them now, a gulf he didn't know how to cross. His older brother Paxton had made his opinion clear from the start. "You're wasting your life," he'd said over Thanksgiving dinner 3 years ago, in front of the whole family. 43 years old and you're fixing toilets. You have a master's degree, Hollis. This is embarrassing. Paxton owned a consulting firm, drove a Lexus, took vacations to places with names Hollis couldn't pronounce. He'd always been the successful one, the one who'd made their parents proud. Standing next to him, Hollis felt like a shadow. His sister Ingrid was gentler, but he could see the worry in her eyes whenever they met for coffee. She'd try to help, sending him job listings or telling him about positions at her company. But the pity in her voice made him feel smaller each time. The villa had been Ingrid's discovery, actually. She'd seen the listing online and sent it to him as a joke. "Look at this disaster. Someone's actually going to pay $1 for it." The auction was on a Tuesday. Hollis had taken the morning off from a bathroom remodel in Riverside Heights and driven to the county assessor's office out of pure curiosity. He'd expected a crowd, but only 7 people showed up, and most of them were there for other properties. The villa sat on Maple Crest Road, on the eastern edge of town, where the neighborhoods transitioned from modest middle-class homes to something almost rural. It had been abandoned for 16 years, ever since the owner, a retired university professor named Thaddeus Wainwright, had died without heirs. The property had gone to the county for unpaid taxes, and now they just wanted it gone. When the auctioneer brought it up, he'd been almost apologetic. "Folks, I'm required to offer this property, but I'll be honest, it's in rough shape. No water, no power, likely has structural issues. Minimum bid is $1. Nobody raised their hand. The auctioneer had started to move on when Hollis surprised himself by speaking up. $1. The auctioneer blinked. Going once, twice, sold to bidder 17 for $1. Just like that, Hollis owned a house. He'd driven out to see it that afternoon, and his stomach had dropped. The photographs in the listing hadn't done justice to how bad it really was. The villa was a sprawling 2-story structure with Spanish-style architecture. Arched windows, terracotta roof tiles, a courtyard in the center, but time and neglect had ravaged it. Windows were broken, some boarded up with plywood. The front door hung crooked on its hinges. The yard was an overgrown jungle of weeds and dead grass. Inside was worse. Squatters had been through at some point, leaving trash and graffiti. Furniture sat ruined by water damage and mold. The kitchen was gutted, appliances stolen. Every surface was coated in dust and grime. Hollis stood in the main sitting room that first day, surrounded by decay, and wondered what he'd done. His phone buzzed, Paxton calling, probably to lecture him. He didn't answer. That night, he slept on a tarp in the cleanest room he could find, his sleeping bag pulled tight against the October chill. The house creaked and settled around him, and somewhere in the walls, something small scurried. But as he lay there in the darkness, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. It was foolish, maybe. The house needed everything. The cost of repairs would dwarf any value the property might have. His family would say he'd made another mistake, another impractical choice that proved he'd never grow up. But something about the place called to him. Maybe it was the architecture, the bones of beauty underneath all the damage. Maybe it was the challenge of it, the idea of taking something broken and making it whole again. Or maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe he just needed to prove to himself that he could still build something, still create something meaningful. The next morning, he started cleaning. He hummed while he worked, old Sinatra tunes and Miles Davis riffs, filling the silence with the only thing that had never failed him. Music had been his first love, long before teaching, long before marriage. It was the language he understood best, the one that made sense when nothing else did. His neighbor, a woman in her 70s named Mrs. Kepler, watched him from her yard with suspicious eyes. When he waved, she didn't wave back. 3 weeks, and he'd filled a dumpster with trash and started to see progress. The main floor was cleared, the windows cleaned. He'd patched the worst of the roof leaks and replaced the front door. It was still a disaster, but it was becoming his disaster. That's when he found the journal. The master bedroom had been the last room Hollis wanted to tackle. Water damage had turned the ceiling into a patchwork of brown stains, and the carpet squelched beneath his boots. But he couldn't put it off forever. He was pulling up sections of ruined carpet when he noticed something wedged between the baseboard and the wall. A book, its leather cover warped and water-stained but still intact. He pulled it free carefully, wiping away the grime with his shirt. The pages inside were filled with handwriting, elegant and precise. A journal. The first entry was dated March 15th, 1992. Today marks 3 months since Margaret's passing. it began. The house feels empty without her laughter. I find myself collecting these recordings as if each one might bring her back even for a moment. She loved music so deeply, perhaps more than she loved me. Hollis sat down on the floor, transfixed. He turned the pages slowly, reading about Professor Thaddeus Wainwright's life after his wife's death. The entries spoke of loneliness, of finding solace in jazz records and old blues recordings, of building something he called the collection. One entry, dated November 1995, caught his attention. Finished the work today. The collection is safe now, preserved as it should be. Let whoever finds this place one day understand, these aren't just records. They're moments suspended in time, proof that beauty exists even when the world tries to convince us otherwise. Hollis read that passage 3 times. The collection, safe, preserved. He set the journal aside and continued working, but his mind kept returning to those words. What collection? Where would someone hide something in a house like this? That evening, his phone rang. Ainsley's name lit up the screen, and his heart jumped the way it always did when she called. "Hey, sweetheart," he answered, perhaps too eagerly. "Hi, Dad." Her voice was bright, professional, the voice she used at work. "I wanted to let you know something," Kent proposed. "We're engaged." The words hit him like cold water. Kent, her boyfriend of 2 years, the software engineer with the steady job and the 401k. A good man, probably, practical. "That's wonderful," Hollis said, and meant it. "Congratulations. I'm so happy for you. Thanks. We're thinking spring wedding. Nothing too big." A pause. "I'll send you details once we have them." The conversation lasted 5 more minutes, full of pleasantries and careful avoidance of real topics. She didn't ask about the villa. He didn't mention the journal. When she hung up, Hollis sat in the darkening room and felt the old familiar ache of being peripheral to his daughter's life. She'd mentioned the engagement almost casually, like she was telling him about a dentist appointment. Once she would have called him first, before anyone else. Once he would have been the person she shared her joy with. He threw himself into work with renewed intensity over the next few days. The journal had mentioned something about the collection being safe, which suggested it was hidden. But where? The house revealed itself slowly. Hollis started noticing things he'd missed before. Architectural oddities, spaces that didn't quite make sense. The den on the main floor had always felt slightly off to him, and now he understood why. The room was smaller than it should be, given the exterior dimensions of the house. He measured carefully, comparing the interior space to what the outside walls suggested. There was a gap, roughly 8 feet of unaccounted space running along the back wall. The flooring in the den was original hardwood, scarred and stained, but solid. Hollis got down on his hands and knees, running his fingers along the boards, tapping occasionally. Most of the floor sounded the same, the dull thud of wood over joists and subflooring. But in one corner, near where a bookshelf had once stood, the sound changed, hollow. His heart quickened. He found his crowbar and carefully pried up the first board. It came free with a screech of nails pulling from old wood. Underneath was darkness and the musty smell of enclosed space. He removed 3 more boards, creating an opening large enough to see through. When he shined his flashlight down, he saw a ladder, wooden rungs leading into a small room below. For a moment, Hollis just stared. Then he lowered himself through the opening. The hidden room was perhaps 10 feet by 12 feet, with the ceiling just tall enough for him to stand upright. The walls were lined with wooden crates, stacked carefully, each one labeled with dates and names written in faded marker. He opened the nearest crate with trembling hands. Inside, wrapped in cloth and packed with care, were vinyl records. Not just any records. These were pristine, the kind of condition collectors dreamed about. He pulled one out carefully. An original pressing of John Coltrane's A Love Supreme, the cover art vivid and unfaded. Hollis opened another crate. Miles Davis, Charlie Parker, Thelonious Monk, Billie Holiday. Records he recognized, and many he didn't. Some were commercial releases, first pressings worth hundreds or thousands of dollars. Others were hand-labeled, demo tapes and unreleased sessions that might not exist anywhere else in the world. There were dozens of crates, maybe hundreds of records. He sat down on the floor of the hidden room, surrounded by treasures, and felt tears on his face, not because of their value, though that crossed his mind, but because of what they represented. Professor Wainwright had loved these recordings enough to hide them, preserve them, protect them. Each one had meant something to him, had connected him to his wife, to beauty, to moments that transcended the ordinary pain of living. Hollis pulled out another record at random. The label read Demo Session, the Fletcher Quintet, 1961. He'd never heard of them, but someone had thought this music mattered enough to save it. He stayed in that room for hours, opening crates, examining records, reading the careful labels Professor Wainwright had created. Some had notes, Margaret's favorite, or reminds me of our wedding night, or simply essential. When he finally climbed back up the ladder, it was past midnight. The house felt different now. Not just a ruin he was trying to restore, but a place with a story, with meaning layered into its bones. He tried calling Ainsley, wanting to share the discovery, but she didn't answer. Of course she didn't. It was late, and she had work in the morning and an engagement to celebrate. Hollis sat in the empty sitting room, the journal open in his lap, and read more of Professor Wainwright's entries. The man had been lonely, that much was clear. After his wife died, he'd retreated from the world, spending his days cataloguing his collection and his nights listening to records in the dark. "Sometimes I think about showing these to others," one entry read. "Having people here again the way we used to. Margaret would want that, but I can't seem to open the door. It's easier this way, keeping it all to myself, safer." The last entry in the journal was dated October 12th, 1998, just weeks before Wainwright died. "I've made a mistake," it said. "All this beauty, and I've kept it locked away. What good is preservation if no one ever experiences what you've preserved? If someone finds this after I'm gone, I hope they'll do better than I did. I hope they'll share it." Hollis closed the journal and looked around at the house, still damaged, still needing so much work, but suddenly feeling less empty. Maybe that's what he was supposed to do here. Not just restore a building, but fulfill Professor Wainwright's last wish. Share the music, open the doors. But first, he needed to understand what he actually had. Hollis didn't sleep that night. He spent the hours before dawn in the hidden room, carefully cataloguing what he found. The sheer scope of the collection overwhelmed him. There had to be at least 300 records, maybe more. Each crate held 20 to 30 albums, all meticulously preserved in plastic sleeves, organized by genre and era. He found original pressings of albums that had defined entire movements in music. A first edition of Miles Davis's Kind of Blue, an original blue. Note pressing of Art Blakey's Moanin', unreleased studio sessions from artists whose names he recognized, but whose music he'd never heard in these versions. And then there were the mysteries, the hand-labeled tapes and acetates, recordings from clubs that no longer existed. Musicians who'd never made it big, but whose talent blazed through even after decades of silence. Around 5 in the morning, Hollis remembered something. In one of the upstairs rooms, covered in dust and draped with a stained sheet, he'd seen an old turntable. At the time, he'd thought about throwing it out. Now he ran upstairs to retrieve it. The turntable was a beauty, a vintage Thorens TD-124, worth something on its own. He carried it down carefully, found an extension cord, and set it up in the sitting room. The needle was worn but serviceable. When he plugged it in, the motor hummed to life. Hollis selected a record almost at random, the Miles Davis recording he'd found first. He placed it on the turntable with the reverence it deserved, lowered the needle, and waited. The first notes filled the empty room like water filling a vessel. The trumpet's voice, warm and contemplative, speaking a language beyond words. Hollis closed his eyes and felt something inside him crack open, a place that had been sealed shut for years. He hadn't played music, really played and listened to music since before the divorce. There'd been no time, no space, no energy for it. Music had become associated with loss, with the teaching job he'd loved and lost, with the part of himself he'd had to put away to survive. But here, in this ruined house with dawn breaking through dirty windows, the music was pure again. It was what it had always been, truth expressed in sound, beauty that didn't require explanation or justification. When the record ended, Hollis sat in silence for a long moment. Then he pulled out his phone and started researching. He needed to know what he had, what it might be worth. More importantly, he needed to understand the historical significance of some of these recordings. Within an hour, he'd found the name of Dr. Harlow Blackburn, a professor emeritus at the State University who specialized in jazz history and had written extensively about rare recordings. Hollis sent an email, not expecting a response for days, if at all. He attached photographs of several of the rarer pieces, the original pressings, some of the hand-labeled demo tapes. He explained the situation briefly, found hidden collection in old house, trying to understand what it is, would appreciate any insight. The response came within 20 minutes. Mr. Trent, if these photographs are legitimate, you found something extraordinary. I can be there this afternoon. Please don't touch anything else until I arrive. H.B. Hollis spent the morning in a daze. He cleaned the sitting room, swept and mopped, opened windows to air out the mustiness. He wanted the space to be presentable, wanted to honor what Professor Wainwright had created. Around 9, there was a knock at the door. Mrs. Kepler stood on the porch, her expression curious rather than suspicious for the first time. "I heard music this morning," she said without preamble. "I haven't heard music from this house in 20 years, Hollis invited her in. She moved slowly, her cane tapping on the floor, looking around with eyes that saw past the decay to what the house had been. "I knew Professor Wainwright," she said. "Not well, but enough to say hello. He was a kind man. After his wife passed, he became a ghost. We'd see him sometimes, always alone, always quiet. The music stopped then, too. He used to play records with the windows open in summer. Beautiful music." She paused in the sitting room, where the turntable still sat. "Is that his collection? The one we all wondered about?" "You knew about it?" Hollis asked. "Rumors. His wife told my late husband once that Thaddeus had a treasure hidden away. We thought maybe it was money or jewelry. Never imagined it was this." She looked at the crates he'd brought up. "What will you do with it?" "I don't know yet," Hollis admitted. "I'm trying to understand what it is first." Mrs. Kepler nodded slowly. "My husband loved jazz. He would have given anything to hear some of these. He passed in 2003. Sometimes I still miss him so much I can't breathe." She touched one of the crates gently. "Music helps with that, doesn't it? The missing." After she left, Hollis stood alone in the sitting room and thought about her words. The missing. Yes, music helped with that. It always had. Dr. Blackburn arrived at 2 o'clock sharp, a tall man in his 70s with white hair and sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He carried a leather satchel and moved with the focused energy of someone on a mission. "Show me," he said. Hollis led him to the hidden room. Dr. Blackburn descended the ladder carefully, and for the next 3 hours he barely spoke. He examined records, made notes in a small notebook, occasionally let out small sounds of amazement or disbelief. When he finally emerged, his face was flushed with excitement. "Mr. Trent," he said, "this collection is remarkable. Some of these recordings are extremely rare. A few might be unique, the only existing copies. The historical value alone is immeasurable. The monetary value is substantial as well. I'd estimate the entire collection could be worth $200,000, possibly more to the right buyers." The number hit Hollis like a physical blow. $200,000. It was more money than he'd made in the last 5 years combined. It would solve every financial problem he had. He could help Ainsley with the wedding. He could pay off his debts. He could stop fixing toilets and maybe, just maybe, find a way back to teaching. "However," Dr. Blackburn continued, "I would urge you to consider the collection's cultural significance. These recordings tell a story about American music, about artists who deserve to be remembered. If you're willing, I'd like to help you document and preserve this collection. Create a proper archive. Perhaps eventually find a way to share it with scholars and enthusiasts." "You mean don't sell it?" Hollis said. "I mean consider what Professor Wainwright intended. He could have sold these at any time. He chose to preserve them instead." After Dr. Blackburn left, promising to return with authentication equipment, Hollis sat in the hidden room and pulled out the crumpled photograph he always carried. Him and Ainsley at the piano recital, both of them smiling. $200,000 could change his life, could change how his family saw him, could prove he wasn't the failure Paxton thought he was. But as he looked around at the carefully labeled crates, at the love and care Professor Wainwright had poured into preserving these recordings, he felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. Some things weren't meant to be sold. Some things were meant to be shared. He just didn't know yet if he was strong enough to make that choice. Dr. Blackburn returned 3 days later with a colleague, a woman named Dr. Simone Castellano, who specialized in archival preservation. Together, they spent an entire day examining the collection, photographing each piece, testing for authenticity, making detailed notes. Hollis watched them work, feeling like an intruder in his own discovery. But their passion was infectious. Dr. Castellano would hold up a record and explain its significance, how this particular pressing had been pulled from shelves due to a label dispute, or how that demo tape represented the only known recording of a legendary late-night jam session. "You have something special here," she told him during a break. "Not just in terms of value, but in terms of history. These recordings are part of our cultural heritage." Late in the afternoon, while Dr. Blackburn was cataloguing the final crate, Dr. Castellano made a discovery. Tucked beneath the last layer of records was a sealed envelope, yellowed with age. "Mr. Trent," she called, "I think you should see this." The envelope was addressed in the same elegant handwriting as the journal. "To whoever inherits this collection." Hollis's hands trembled as he opened it. Inside was a letter, several pages long, written on fine stationery. "Dear friend," it began, "if you're reading this, then I am gone, and you have found what I spent the last years of my life preserving. I hope the discovery brings you joy, as building it brought me solace in my darkest hours." Professor Wainwright's letter told the story Hollis had already pieced together from the journal, but with more detail. He and his wife, Margaret, had been married for 38 years. She'd been a music professor too, specializing in vocal performance. They'd collected records together, attending concerts, visiting record shops, building a shared passion. When she was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, they'd been given 6 months. She'd lived for 8, and every day Wainwright had played her favorite recordings, jazz, blues, classical, everything she loved. Music had been their language when words failed. After her death, he'd thrown himself into collecting with almost manic intensity. Every record was a memory, a moment with her, a way of keeping her alive. He'd spent his savings, traveled to estate sales and auctions, tracked down rare pressings and forgotten recordings. "But somewhere along the way," the letter continued, "I made a mistake. I became so focused on preserving these treasures that I forgot their purpose. Music isn't meant to be locked away. It's meant to be shared, experienced, lived." Margaret understood that. She would open our home to students and friends, host listening parties, loan records to anyone who asked. She knew that beauty multiplies when you give it away. The letter went on. "I've become a miser of memories, hoarding what should be given freely. I'm too old now, too set in my grief to change. But perhaps you are not. Perhaps you will do what I could not. Open the doors, share the music. Let these recordings live again instead of gathering dust in the dark." The final paragraph struck Hollis deepest. "If you found this house and this collection, perhaps you needed them as much as I once did. Perhaps you're looking for something you've lost, a sense of purpose, a connection to beauty, a reason to believe that life holds more than survival. I hope these recordings give you what they gave me in my better moments, proof that human beings are capable of creating something transcendent, something that outlasts pain and loss and time itself." It was signed simply, Thaddeus Wainwright, September 1998. Hollis read the letter twice, then a third time. When he looked up, both professors were watching him quietly. "He wrote this to you," Dr. Blackburn said gently. "Not literally, of course. But he knew someone would find this eventually. He left instructions." That evening, after the professors had gone, Hollis sat alone in the sitting room and called Ainsley. This time she answered on the second ring. Dad, hi. I was going to call you. We've set a date for the wedding, April 27th. I know that's only 5 months away, but Kent's parents can't travel in summer, and we didn't want to wait a whole year. April is perfect, Hollis said. Ainsley, I need to tell you about something I found. He explained the collection, trying to keep his voice steady. He told her about the hidden room, the rare recordings, what the professors had said about their value. He read her parts of Wainwright's letter. When he finished, there was a long silence. $200,000, she finally said. Dad, that's incredible. That would solve everything for you. It would, he agreed. But you're not sure if you want to sell it. It wasn't a question. No, he admitted. I'm not sure. Another pause. What does Kent think? What do you think you should do? Hollis smiled despite himself. The Freudian slip told him something. What does Kent think about what? About the wedding. We're trying to keep it small, but his parents want to invite everyone they know. It's turning into this big production, and I don't know. I guess I'm feeling overwhelmed. They talked for another 20 minutes, the longest conversation they'd had in months. She told him about the wedding planning stress, about her job, about Kent's family. He told her about the villa's restoration, about Mrs. Kepler and her stories, about Professor Wainwright. Before she hung up, she said, Dad, about the collection. Don't let anyone pressure you into selling if it doesn't feel right. I know Paxton will tell you you're being impractical, but honestly, when has being practical ever made you happy? After the call, Hollis sat in the dark and thought about her words. When had being practical ever made him happy? Never. Every time he'd chosen the safe path, the reasonable path, he'd ended up more lost than before. The next morning, he made a decision. He called Dr. Blackburn and asked if it would be possible to sell just a few pieces from the collection, enough to cover the villa's immediate restoration costs and get him through the next few months financially. Of course, Dr. Blackburn said. I can connect you with reputable collectors. Which pieces were you thinking? Hollis had already identified 3 records that, while valuable, weren't unique. Common enough that copies existed in other collections, rare enough that serious collectors would pay well for them. He could raise about $15,000, enough to breathe without depleting what Wainwright had built. I want to keep the collection together, he told Dr. Blackburn, almost all of it anyway. But I need to be able to support myself while I figure out what to do with it. That's very wise, Dr. Blackburn said. And it honors Professor Wainwright's intentions. He wouldn't want you to suffer for the sake of preservation. Within a week, Dr. Blackburn had found buyers for the 3 records. The money arrived in Hollis's account like rain after a drought. Not enough to be wealthy, but enough to keep working on the villa without panic. Enough to buy materials and pay for the permits he needed. He stood in the sitting room, looking at the space with new eyes. The room was large, with high ceilings and good acoustics. The windows faced east, letting in morning light. It could be beautiful. He started sketching plans. Comfortable seating, proper shelving for the records, good lighting, maybe a small performance space in the corner. Not a museum, not a private collection. Something in between. A place where people could come and listen, really listen, the way music was meant to be heard. Mrs. Kepler brought him coffee one afternoon while he worked. You're going to open it to people, she said, reading his expression. Like it used to be. Maybe, Hollis said. If I can figure out how, she smiled. My husband would have loved this. There are others in the neighborhood who would too. We're not all gone yet, those of us who remember what it was like when music mattered. As she left, Hollis realized something. He wasn't alone in this. The collection belonged to him legally, but it belonged to something larger in spirit, to the community, to the history it represented, to everyone who'd ever found solace in a song. He just had to be brave enough to share it. 2 months passed in a rhythm of work and discovery. Hollis fell into a routine. Mornings spent on handyman jobs to cover basic expenses, afternoons and evenings devoted to the villa. The $15,000 from the record sales gave him breathing room, let him buy materials without panic, pay for the professional help he needed for electrical and plumbing work. The house transformed slowly. He replaced broken windows, patched walls, sanded and refinished the hardwood floors in the sitting room. Each improvement revealed more of the villa's original beauty, the craftsmanship in the crown molding, the elegant archways between rooms, the way light moved through the space at different times of day. He worked alone mostly, but Mrs. Kepler stopped by regularly with food and stories. She told him about the neighborhood's history, about when Maple Crest Road had been considered prestigious, about the families who'd lived here before suburban sprawl moved the money elsewhere. Professor Wainwright used to host gatherings, she said one afternoon, watching Hollis install new light fixtures before his wife died. Small groups, maybe 10 or 15 people. They'd sit in that very room and listen to records for hours. No talking, just listening. It was like church, my husband said, but better. Hollis found himself thinking about those gatherings constantly. What would it take to recreate that? Not exactly the same. Times had changed, people had changed, but something in that spirit. A place where music mattered, where people could experience it without distraction. He started making plans more seriously. Drew sketches, measured spaces, calculated costs. The sitting room could hold maybe 20 people comfortably. He'd need better seating, proper acoustic treatment, a high-quality sound system to do the recordings justice. It was ambitious, probably foolish, but it felt right in a way nothing had felt right in years. In early December, while organizing his storage unit to make room for materials, he found a box he'd packed away after the divorce. Inside were teaching supplies, old lesson plans, and buried at the bottom, a cassette tape in a plastic case. The label read, "For Ainsley, Dad's Favorites." He remembered making it when she was 12, right after the piano competition. A mixtape of songs he wanted her to know. Ella Fitzgerald, Louis Armstrong, Bill Evans, Nina Simone. He'd recorded it on an old tape deck, adding commentary between tracks, explaining why each song mattered to him. He'd given it to her, and she'd listened to it constantly for months, until the divorce changed everything and the tape disappeared into a box, forgotten. Hollis sat on the floor of the storage unit and held the cassette like it was made of glass. This small thing represented a time when he and Ainsley had spoken the same language, when music had been a bridge between them instead of a reminder of what he'd lost. He put it in his pocket and drove to the villa. That evening he called her. "I found something today," he said when she answered. "The mixtape I made you. Remember that?" A pause. "Oh my God, I forgot about that tape. I loved that tape. I thought maybe you'd want it back. I could mail it to you or—" "Actually," Ainsley interrupted, "I've been meaning to come see the house. Kent's curious too. Would this weekend work?" Saturday arrived cold and bright. Hollis had spent the previous day cleaning obsessively, wanting the villa to make the right impression. He'd made real progress. The sitting room was nearly finished, warm and inviting with the refinished floors and new paint. The collection was organized on temporary shelving, each record properly catalogued. Ainsley arrived at 2 with Kent, a tall man in his 30s, with an easy smile and careful eyes. He shook Hollis's hand firmly. "Mr. Trent, I've heard a lot about this place. Please call me Hollis. Come in, I'll show you around." He gave them the tour, starting with the main floor. Ainsley moved through the rooms with visible surprise, touching walls, looking out windows, taking in the transformation. "Dad, this is incredible. I can't believe you did all this yourself." "Not entirely myself. Had help with the electrical and plumbing. But most of it, yes." In the sitting room, he showed them the collection. Kent examined the records with genuine interest, asking intelligent questions about provenance and preservation. Ainsley was quieter, her eyes moving around the space. "You're going to open this to people?" she asked. "That's the idea. A listening library. Free to anyone who wants to come," he paused. "I know it sounds impractical." "It sounds like you," she said softly. He played records for them, curating a short program. Coltrane, Billie Holiday, a demo tape from an unknown pianist that made all 3 of them fall silent. The music filled the space the way it was meant to, creating a shared experience that felt almost sacred. When the last record ended, Kent spoke first. "This is special, really special. You're creating something people need." "He's right," Ainsley added. It's not impractical, Dad, it's necessary. The world has enough practical things. They talked for another hour about the vision for the space, about logistics and challenges. Kent offered advice from a financial perspective, how to structure it as a non-profit, potential grant opportunities, ways to cover operating costs. You'll need insurance, of course, Kent said, and proper documentation for the collection. But it's doable. People do harder things every day. Before they left, Ainsley hugged him tightly. I'm proud of you, she whispered. This is who you're supposed to be. In the car, driving away, she reached over and squeezed Kent's hand. Her father was building something real, something meaningful. For the first time in years, he looked alive. After they left, Hollis returned to the sitting room and sat in the gathering dusk. Ainsley's words echoed in his mind. This is who you're supposed to be. Maybe she was right. Maybe this was always who he was supposed to be. Not the successful professional Paxton wanted him to be. Not the practical provider Beatrice had needed. But someone who created space for beauty. Who preserved things that mattered. Who believed music could heal. His phone buzzed. A text from Paxton. Heard about your record collection. Call me. Hollis stared at the message, debating. He hadn't spoken to his brother since the auction, hadn't wanted to hear the criticism he knew was coming. But putting it off wouldn't make it easier. He called. You've lost your mind, Paxton said without preamble. Ingrid told me you're planning to give everything away. Do you understand how insane that is? You could sell that collection, invest the money, set yourself up properly for once in your life. I sold 3 pieces, Hollis said calmly. That was enough. Enough? Enough for what? To keep living in that dump, fixing toilets until you're 70. You have a chance here, Hollis, a real chance. And you're throwing it away because of some romantic notion about sharing music with strangers. It's not romantic, Hollis said. It's what the collection is meant for. According to who? Some dead professor you never met? He doesn't get to make decisions for you. No, but he gets to be an example. He tried hoarding beauty and regretted it. I'm not going to make the same mistake. Paxton was silent for a moment. You're really going to do this? Turn your life into some kind of charity project? I'm going to honor what I found. That's different. It's the same pattern, Hollis. You've always chosen the impractical path, always put ideals ahead of reality. That's why you lost your job, why your marriage failed, why you're in this mess in the first place. The words stung because part of Hollis wondered if they were true. But another part, the part that had been growing stronger since he found the collection, knew that wasn't the whole story. Maybe, he said. Or maybe I just never found the right thing to build until now. Either way, it's my choice to make. He hung up before Paxton could respond. His hands were shaking, but he felt oddly calm. For years, his brother's disapproval had felt like an indictment. Now it just felt like noise. The cassette tape sat on the table where he'd left it. Tomorrow he'd mail it to Ainsley, let her rediscover those songs, those moments of connection. Maybe she'd listen, maybe she wouldn't, but at least she'd know he'd kept it, that he'd remembered. Outside, the winter sun set early, painting the sky orange and purple. Hollis turned on the lights in the sitting room, put on a record, Miles Davis again, the one he'd played that first morning, and sat in the space he was creating. The house was becoming what it was meant to be, and so was he. January brought snow and complications. Hollis woke one morning to find the sitting room ceiling had developed a new leak, water staining the fresh paint he'd applied just weeks before. The roof needed more work than he'd realized, and the estimate from the roofer made his stomach drop. $8,000, minimum. He sat at his kitchen table in the small apartment he still rented, staring at his bank balance. The money from the record sales was mostly gone, spent on permits and materials and the endless small expenses of restoration. He had maybe $3,000 left. Not enough. The practical thing would be to sell more records. Dr. Blackburn had interested buyers lined up, collectors who'd pay premium prices. Just 5 or 6 pieces would cover the roof and leave enough for contingencies. It would be so easy. Instead, Hollis found himself back in the hidden room, searching through Professor Wainwright's remaining papers. There had to be more letters, more guidance, something to help him understand what he was supposed to do. Behind the last crate, he found a small metal box he'd missed before. Inside were more documents, deeds, insurance papers, and buried beneath them, an envelope marked personal. The envelope contained a contract, yellowed and brittle. Hollis unfolded it carefully. It was dated March 1962 from Columbia Records, offering Thaddeus Wainwright a recording contract as a solo pianist. The terms were generous, a 3-album deal with substantial advance payment and promotional support. At the bottom, where the signature should be, there was only blank space. Wainwright had never signed it. Attached was a handwritten note on Columbia letterhead. "Thaddeus, we need your decision by Friday. This is your chance. Don't let it slip away. Bernard Klein, A&R. Hollis found his answer in the journal in an entry dated that same week. "Margaret says I should sign. The money would be life-changing, but they want commercial material, want me to modify my style for mass appeal. I've spent 20 years developing my voice as a pianist. If I compromise that now, what's left? She says she'll support whatever I choose. I know she means it, but I also know she worries about money, about our future. Still, I can't do it. I'd rather teach and play for myself than become a product. Is that selfish? Perhaps. But it's honest." There it was, Wainwright's choice, the same choice Hollis faced now. Security versus authenticity. The practical path versus the true one. The difference was that Wainwright had someone who supported him either way. Hollis had criticism from one brother, worried support from his sister, and a daughter who was proud but distant. Mrs. Kepler found him sitting in the hidden room that afternoon, the unsigned contract in his hands. "You look troubled," she said, lowering herself down the ladder with surprising agility for her age. He showed her the contract, explained the situation, the roof, the money, the choice. She was quiet for a long moment. "My husband had a similar choice once," she finally said. "He was an engineer, got offered a job in Houston with triple his salary. We would have been comfortable for life. But it meant leaving here, leaving his mother who was sick, leaving the community theater where he volunteered. He turned it down. Do you regret it?" Hollis asked. "Some days, yes. When money was tight, when we couldn't afford things we wanted. But mostly. No, he was happy here. He died happy, knowing he'd lived honestly. That's worth more than comfort." After she left, Hollis made his decision. He wouldn't sell more records. He'd find another way. He spent the next week applying for every grant he could find. Arts preservation, community development, historic restoration. He reached out to local arts councils, cultural foundations, anyone who might support what he was trying to build. Most didn't respond. A few sent polite rejections. But one, a small emergency fund run by the County Arts Commission, asked for more information. He wrote them a detailed proposal, explaining the collection's significance, Wainwright's vision, his plan for the listening library. He included photographs of the villa's transformation, letters of support from Dr. Blackburn and Dr. Castellano, testimonials from neighbors. The waiting period was 2 weeks. Meanwhile, he covered the leak with tarps and kept working on everything else. The sitting room might have a stained ceiling, but the rest could still be perfect. Word had spread in the neighborhood. People started stopping by, retired teachers, old jazz enthusiasts, former students of Wainwright's who'd heard about the collection. Hollis gave informal tours, played records for visitors, shared Wainwright's story. An elderly man named Otto Brennan came by one afternoon, introduced himself as a former student. "Professor Wainwright changed my life," Otto said, standing in the sitting room with tears in his eyes. "I was a terrible piano student, no talent whatsoever, but he taught me to listen. Really listen. That skill served me better than any recital ever could have. I became a sound engineer because of him." More stories like that emerged. A woman who said Wainwright had loaned her records when she couldn't afford to buy them. A former colleague who remembered his generosity with struggling students. People who'd been touched by his teaching, by his passion for music, by his belief that beauty should be accessible. Hollis realized the collection wasn't just recordings. It was the physical manifestation of a life spent believing that music mattered, that beauty mattered, that taking time to truly listen was an act of resistance against a world that moved too fast. Ingrid visited mid-January, brought him groceries and stayed to help paint. They worked in comfortable silence for a while before she spoke. "Paxton's struggling," she said. "His business lost a major contract. He's worried about making payroll." Hollis stopped painting. "I didn't know." "He won't admit it. Too proud. But that's why he's been so angry about your collection. He sees you choosing this path when you could have money, and it feels like judgment. Like you're saying money doesn't matter. That's not what I'm saying. I know that. But he doesn't. He's built his whole identity on financial success. When that's threatened, he attacks the people who've chosen differently. Makes him feel better about his own choices." Hollis thought about the unsigned contract, about Wainwright's choice. "Do you think I'm being foolish?" "Keeping the collection." Ingrid set down her paintbrush. "I think you're being brave. Foolish might be easier, honestly. But you're doing something that matters, and that takes courage. I'm proud of you, little brother. Even if Paxton can't say it." The day before Ainsley's wedding, the letter arrived from the County Arts Commission. Hollis opened it with trembling hands, barely daring to hope. "Dear Mr. Trent, we are pleased to inform you that your application for emergency preservation funding has been approved. A grant of $12,000 has been allocated to support the restoration and preservation of the Wainwright collection and villa. $12,000. More than enough for the roof. Enough for proper shelving and acoustic treatment, enough to actually open the space the way he'd envisioned." Hollis sat on the floor of the villa and cried. Not just from relief, though that was part of it, but from something deeper, validation. The community believed in what he was building. They saw value in preserving beauty, in creating space for connection, in honoring Wainwright's legacy. He called Ainsley immediately. "Dad, is everything okay?" "Everything's wonderful," he said, and meant it. "I got the grant. The villa, it's really going to happen." Her joy came through the phone like sunlight. "Dad, that's amazing. See? I told you it would work out. I couldn't have done it without you," he said. "Without you believing in me." Tomorrow was her wedding. Tomorrow he'd walk his daughter down the aisle, be part of her new beginning. But today, right now, he had his own beginning to celebrate. The roof could be fixed. The sitting room could be completed. The doors could open. Professor Wainwright's dream, and now his dream too, could become real. The wedding was everything Ainsley had wanted. Small, intimate, honest. Only 40 guests in a restored barn on the outskirts of town. String lights hanging from the rafters, simple flowers on rough wooden tables. She told Hollis she and Kent had decided to stop trying to please everyone and just create something that felt like them. When the music started and Hollis offered his arm, Ainsley looked at him with clear eyes. She wore her grandmother's pearl necklace and a dress she'd found at a vintage shop, simple and elegant. Beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with expense. "You ready, Dad?" she asked. "I've been ready for this moment since you were born," he said. They walked down the aisle together, and Hollis felt the eyes of relatives he hadn't seen in years. Paxton was there with his wife, sitting stiff and uncomfortable in the third row. Ingrid smiled through tears, but Hollis only saw Ainsley, radiant and certain, walking toward the life she'd chosen. When the officiant asked who gave this woman, Hollis said, "Her mother and I do with love and gratitude," and meant every word. He kissed Ainsley's cheek and took his seat, feeling both loss and fullness in equal measure. The ceremony was brief and personal. Kent and Ainsley had written their own vows, words that spoke of partnership and growth and choosing each other every day. When they kissed as husband and wife, the barn erupted in applause. At the reception, Hollis found himself cornered by relatives with questions about the villa, the collection, his plans. He answered patiently, aware of Paxton watching from across the room. It was Ainsley who saved him, appearing at his elbow with a request. "Dad, I want to do the father-daughter dance now." And I picked the song. The opening notes of "What a Wonderful World" filled the barn, Louis Armstrong's gravelly voice, tender and full of hope. Hollis remembered singing this song to Ainsley when she was small, when nightmares woke her and only music could soothe her back to sleep. They moved slowly across the floor, and Ainsley rested her head on his shoulder the way she had when she was little. "Thank you for not giving up," she whispered. "On the house, on yourself, on us. Thank you for giving me another chance," he said. When the song ended, she pulled back and looked at him seriously. "I need to tell you something. Kent and I talked about it. We want to make a donation to the Wainwright house. Not a lot, we're not rich, but enough to help get it started. Consider it a wedding gift to you." Hollis shook his head. "Sweetheart, you don't need to." "I know I don't need to. I want to. This is important, Dad. What you're building matters. Let us be part of it." Later, after the speeches and the cake, Hollis sat with Ingrid at one of the back tables. They watched Ainsley and Kent dance, watched the celebration unfold with quiet satisfaction. "You raised a good woman," Ingrid said. "She raised herself, mostly. I just tried not to mess her up too badly," Ingrid laughed. "You did better than you think." She paused. "Paxton's here. That's something, is it?" "For him, yes. He's hurting Hollis. The business problems are worse than I told you. He might have to declare bankruptcy. Coming here, watching Ainsley celebrate, knowing he can't afford to be generous the way he always has been, it's killing him." Hollis looked across the room to where Paxton stood alone by the bar, nursing a drink. His brother looked older than his 50 years, tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. "I should talk to him," Hollis said. "Maybe wait until after the wedding," Ingrid suggested. "Don't give him a chance to make a scene." But as guests started leaving and the evening wound down, Hollis found himself approaching his brother. Paxton stiffened when he saw him coming. "Hell of a party," Paxton said, his words slightly slurred. "Small but nice, practical." "She's happy," Hollis said. "That's what matters." They stood in uncomfortable silence. Finally, Paxton spoke. "Ingrid tells me you got some grant for your project." "I did." "Good for you." The words came out bitter. "Nice when things work out." "Paxton, don't! Whatever you're about to say, just don't. I don't need your pity." "It's not pity. It's an invitation. The Wainwright house opens in 6 weeks. I could use help. You said once you know bookkeeping. I need someone to help with that. It's not paid, but charity work." Paxton laughed harshly. "That's what you're offering me? Volunteer work at your little passion project?" "I'm offering you a chance to be part of something meaningful," Hollis said quietly. "No judgment, no expectations. Just an opportunity." Paxton stared at him, emotions warring across his face. For a moment, Hollis thought he might accept. Then his brother shook his head. "I don't need your handouts, Hollis. I'll figure out my own problems." He walked away, leaving Hollis standing alone. Ingrid appeared beside him. "You tried," she said. "That's more than he deserved, given how he's treated you. He's our brother. He's hurting, and too proud to accept help. That's not your fault." Hollis drove home late that night, the roads empty and dark. The wedding had been beautiful, his daughter radiant, the day everything it should have been. But Paxton's pain nagged at him. How strange that his brother, who'd had everything Hollis thought he wanted, was now the one struggling, while Hollis felt, for the first time in years, like he was exactly where he should be. The villa was dark when he arrived. He let himself in, turned on lights, walked through the rooms he'd spent months restoring. Tomorrow the roofing crew would start. Next week, the new shelving would be installed. In 6 weeks, these doors would open to the public. He went down to the hidden room one last time, running his hand along the crates. How strange that this discovery had changed everything, not because of its monetary value, but because it had given him purpose, direction, a reason to believe his life could still mean something. He picked up the sealed envelope he'd found weeks ago, the one marked, "To whom it may concern." He'd read the letter inside multiple times, but tonight he needed to read it again. He climbed back up with the envelope and sat in the sitting room under the stained ceiling that would soon be repaired. The letter was several pages long, but one passage stood out tonight. "The tragedy of my life was not Margaret's death. Death comes to us all. The tragedy was how I responded to it, how I locked myself away with these recordings, hoarding beauty instead of sharing it. I became a curator of my own loneliness. Don't make that mistake, friend. Whatever you've lost, Whatever brought you to this house, don't let it make you small. Let it make you generous. Hollis folded the letter carefully and set it aside. He pulled out his phone and texted Paxton, "The invitation stands whenever you're ready. No pressure. Just know you're welcome." He didn't expect a response tonight. Maybe not ever, but he'd extended the hand. The rest was up to his brother. Outside, the February wind rattled the windows. Inside, the villa was warm, full of possibility. Hollis turned off the lights and locked the door, already thinking about tomorrow's work. The collection had been hidden for 20 years, waiting for someone to find it. Now it had been found, and soon it would fulfill its purpose. Not locked away, but shared. Not hoarded, but given freely. Just as Professor Wainwright had wished. Just as Hollis was finally learning to do. Opening day was set for March 15th, the same date Professor Wainwright had written his first journal entry after Margaret's death. Exactly 33 years later. Hollis had 6 weeks to finish everything, and the list of tasks felt endless. The grant money arrived in early February, and with it came validation that felt almost spiritual. The county believed in what he was building. That meant something. The roofing crew finished their work in 4 days, replacing damaged sections and sealing everything properly. When the first rain came, Hollis stood in the sitting room and watched the ceiling stay perfectly dry. Such a small thing, but it felt like victory. Dr. Blackburn returned with a team of graduate students to help properly catalog and organize the collection. They worked methodically, creating a database with detailed information about each recording. Provenance, condition, historical significance. The students treated the records with reverence, understanding they were handling pieces of cultural history. "This collection should be in a museum," one student said, carefully examining a rare Billie Holiday acetate. "It is in a museum," Dr. Blackburn corrected gently. "Just one that's alive, that people can experience intimately. That's more valuable than glass cases." Local musicians started appearing, drawn by word of mouth. A jazz guitarist named Felix Drummond asked if he could perform at the opening. A blues harmonica player named Yolanda Cross wanted to know if there would be regular sessions. Hollis said yes to everyone, feeling the vision expand beyond what he'd originally imagined. Mrs. Kepler organized a neighborhood meeting at her house. 20 people showed up, retired teachers, longtime residents, artists, music lovers. They wanted to help. "This house was important once," Mrs. Kepler told the group. "It can be important again. But Hollis can't do it alone." They formed committees. Someone would handle publicity. Others would create a schedule for performances. A retired librarian named Maureen Caldwell volunteered to staff the space during open hours. A carpenter offered to build custom display cases for photographs and memorabilia. "Why are you all doing this?" Hollis asked, overwhelmed by their generosity. "Because places like this matter," Maureen said simply. "Because the world needs more spaces where people can slow down and actually experience beauty. Because you're giving us a gift, and we want to give back." The work intensified as March approached. Hollis spent 16-hour days at the villa, installing shelving, arranging seating, setting up the sound system. Kent came by on weekends to help with the bookkeeping setup, teaching Hollis how to track donations and expenses properly. "You'll need insurance," Kent said, "and you should register as a non-profit eventually. But for now, just focus on opening. The rest can come later." Ainsley visited one Saturday with lunch for everyone. She walked through the nearly finished space with visible emotion. "Dad, this is beautiful. Really beautiful." The sitting room had been transformed. Comfortable chairs and small sofas arranged in intimate clusters. Soft lighting that could be adjusted for different moods. The record collection displayed on custom shelving, organized and accessible. Photographs of Professor Wainwright and Margaret on the walls, their story preserved. "I keep thinking about what you said at the wedding," Hollis told her, "about not giving up. There were so many moments when I almost did, when it seemed impossible. But you didn't," she said. "That's what matters." 2 weeks before opening, disaster struck. The final building inspection revealed code violations Hollis hadn't known about: inadequate fire exits, missing emergency lighting, outdated electrical panels in 2 rooms. The inspector was apologetic but firm. "I can't give you an occupancy permit until these are fixed. I'm sorry, the repairs would cost another $4,000. Money Hollis didn't have. The grant funds were depleted, his savings exhausted. He sat in his truck after the inspector left and felt the weight of impossible choices settling on his shoulders. He could delay the opening, but the musicians were scheduled, the publicity had gone out, people were expecting something. He could ask for donations, but that felt like begging. He could, the thought made him sick, sell more records. Or he could ask for help. That evening, Hollis swallowed every ounce of pride he had left and called Paxton. The phone rang 4 times before his brother answered. "What do you want?" Paxton's voice was flat, tired. "I need help," Hollis said simply. "The villa needs code compliance work before I can open. It's $4,000 I don't have. I'm asking if you could loan it to me. I'll pay you back. I just need time." The silence stretched so long, Hollis thought the call had dropped. "You're calling me for money," Paxton finally said. "After everything, after choosing your precious collection over financial security, now you need money from me. I know how it sounds. You don't know anything." Paxton's voice broke. "You think I have $4,000 to loan? I'm 3 months behind on my mortgage, Hollis. My business is failing. I might lose everything. And you're calling me for a loan?" Hollis closed his eyes. "I didn't know. Ingrid said you were struggling, but I didn't realize." "Of course you didn't realize. You've been too busy with your project to notice anyone else's problems." The bitterness in Paxton's voice cut deep. "I can't help you. I'm sorry, but I can't." The call ended. Hollis sat in the darkness of his truck, feeling like he'd failed at everything that mattered. But the next morning, Mrs. Kepler knocked on the villa door with news. She'd overheard his conversation with the inspector and had taken it upon herself to spread the word. The neighborhood committee had decided to hold an emergency fundraiser. "We're having a benefit concert this Saturday," she announced. "Felix and Yolanda are organizing it. We'll charge admission, ask for donations. We'll get you the money you need. Mrs. Kepler, you don't have to—" "Hush, this isn't charity. This is community. There's a difference. The benefit concert happened in the villa's courtyard, hastily organized but full of heart. 50 people showed up, paying $20 each for admission. Local musicians performed. Mrs. Kepler set up a donation table. People gave what they could, $10, $50, $100. By evening's end, they'd raised $3,800. Close enough. Hollis stood before the crowd, unable to speak for a long moment. Finally he managed, "Thank you, all of you. This place, what we're building here, it's not mine. It's ours." Professor Wainwright understood that. Beauty belongs to everyone. The electrical work was completed in 3 days. The fire exits were upgraded. The emergency lighting installed. When the inspector returned for the final check, he smiled and handed Hollis the occupancy permit. "Good luck with the opening," he said. "The neighborhood needs places like this." Opening day was 1 week away. The space was ready. The collection was organized. The volunteers were scheduled. Everything was in place. Hollis stood alone in the sitting room late that night, exhausted but filled with something he hadn't felt in years, certainty. This was right. This was what he was meant to do. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "This is Paxton. I'm sorry about the other night. I was wrong to speak to you that way. If the invitation still stands, I'd like to help. No promises, but I'd like to try." Hollis read the message 3 times, then typed back, "It stands. Come by any time. The doors would open in 7 days. The music would play. People would gather, listen, connect." And Hollis Trent, who'd bought a ruined villa for $1 and found something worth more than money, would finally understand what it meant to come home. Opening day arrived with clear skies and unseasonable warmth for mid-March. Hollis woke at dawn in his apartment, too nervous to sleep longer. He showered, dressed in the one good shirt he owned, and drove to the villa as the sun rose over the hills. The house looked different in morning light, transformed, purposeful, alive. The sign out front, handmade by a local artist, read, "The Wainwright House, a listening library. Free to all. Open today, 10 a.m. Inside, Hollis made final adjustments. He straightened chairs, dusted shelves one more time, tested the sound system. On the entrance table, he placed the guest book Kent and Ainsley had given him as an opening gift, a beautiful leather-bound volume with Wainwright House embossed on the cover. Beside it, he set the framed photograph of Professor Wainwright and Margaret, the one he'd found in the hidden room. They smiled at the camera, young and full of hope, unaware of the loss and loneliness that would come, but also unaware of the legacy they'd create. Mrs. Kepler arrived at 9:30 with a platter of cookies, arranged carefully on her grandmother's china. "For the guests," she said, setting them on a side table. "First impressions matter." Dr. Blackburn arrived next, with several colleagues from the university, all eager to see the finished space. They walked through reverently, admiring the organization, the care taken with each detail. "You've created something special," Dr. Blackburn told Hollis. "This is exactly what Professor Wainwright hoped for." By 9:45, a small crowd had gathered outside. Hollis recognized some faces, neighbors, volunteers who'd helped with the fundraiser, Otto Brennan, who'd been Wainwright's student. Others were strangers, people who'd seen the article in the local paper or heard word of mouth. At 9:58, Ainsley and Kent arrived. She hugged her father tightly. "Proud of you, Dad," she whispered. At exactly 10 o'clock, Hollis unlocked the front door and stepped back. The crowd filed in slowly, quietly, as if entering sacred space. Hollis greeted each person, shook hands, welcomed them. The sitting room filled with people examining the collection, reading the information cards Dr. Blackburn's students had created, looking at photographs on the walls. The atmosphere was hushed, respectful, full of anticipation. Hollis had prepared a brief welcome. He stood near the fireplace, and gradually people gathered around him. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice steadier than he felt. "This house has a story, and I'd like to share it with you." He told them about Professor Wainwright, his life, his love for Margaret, his decades of collecting, his regret at keeping it all locked away. He told them about finding the hidden room, reading the letters, understanding what he'd been asked to do. "Professor Wainwright wrote that beauty multiplies when you give it away," Hollis said. "He learned that lesson too late to fully live it, but we can learn it now. This collection doesn't belong to me. It belongs to all of us, to anyone who wants to sit quietly and listen, really listen, to music that has survived because it matters." He gestured to the shelves of records. "This isn't a museum where you look but don't touch. This is a living space. Take a record, play it, share it. Bring your friends. Bring your children. Bring your sadness or your joy. Music holds all of it." Someone in the back started clapping, and the applause spread through the room. Hollis felt his throat tighten with emotion. "One more thing," he said. "My daughter and her husband signed the guest book first this morning, but I want to invite each of you to add your names. This is your house too now. You're part of its story." The first record he played was, fittingly, the Miles Davis recording he'd discovered that first morning in the hidden room. As the trumpet's voice filled the space, the crowd fell silent, listening. Hollis watched their faces. Some closed their eyes, some nodded with the rhythm, some simply stared into space, lost in memory or feeling. This was what music was supposed to be. Not background noise, not something consumed while multitasking, but an experience that demanded presence. Throughout the day, people came and went. Some stayed for hours, moving between records, reading the collection notes, talking quietly with others. Musicians arrived, Felix Drummond with his guitar, Yolanda Cross with her harmonica. They played informal sets in the corner, adding live music to the recorded treasures. Older visitors shared memories of seeing these artists perform, of buying these albums when they were new, of what the music had meant to them at different points in their lives. Younger people discovered recordings they'd never heard, artists they'd never known, existed. Maureen Caldwell, the retired librarian, stationed herself near the collection and helped people navigate it, suggesting records based on their interests, creating impromptu programs of listening. Around 2 o'clock, the door opened and Paxton walked in. He stood in the doorway uncertainly, looking around at the crowd, the space, the transformation. Hollis crossed to him immediately. "You came. I said I would." Paxton's voice was quiet. I wanted to see what you've built. Hollis gave him a tour, explaining the layout, the collection organization, the vision for regular programming. Paxton listened without comment, examining everything carefully. In the hidden room, which Hollis had left accessible for tours, Paxton stood among the crates and shook his head slowly. You could have sold all this, made a fortune, lived comfortably for the first time in years. I could have, Hollis agreed. But then I'd just have money. This way I have purpose. Paxton was quiet for a long moment. I've spent my life chasing money, building a business, trying to be successful, and I'm about to lose it all. Meanwhile, you bought a house for $1 and created something that actually matters. He looked at his brother. I've been angry at you for making different choices, but really I was angry at myself for making the wrong ones. They weren't wrong, Hollis said. They were just different. We both did what we thought we should do. Maybe, but I think you were wiser than I was. Paxton managed a small smile. So, about that bookkeeping help you mentioned. If the offer still stands, I could use something to focus on besides my own problems. It stands. They climbed back up to the main floor, where the afternoon light slanted through windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. A Coltrane record played, complex and searching. People sat scattered around the room, lost in listening. Paxton found a seat in the corner and simply sat, letting the music wash over him. Hollis watched his brother's rigid posture slowly soften, saw something in his face release. This was what the space was for, healing connection, the simple but profound act of being present with beauty. As the day wore on and the sun began to set, Hollis stood in the doorway between rooms and looked at what he'd created. Not alone, never alone, but with help from Ainsley, from Mrs. Kepler, from the community that had believed in this vision. The house was alive again, just as Professor Wainwright had wanted. And so was Hollis. The opening day stretched into evening. Someone suggested bringing in food, and before long it had turned into an impromptu gathering. People shared meals on paper plates, talked between records, formed connections over shared musical memories. Felix Drummond played a jazz standard, and several older couples got up to dance in the courtyard, moving slowly under the string lights Mrs. Kepler had hung. Hollis watched from the doorway, amazed at how naturally it had all unfolded. Around 7, as the crowd began to thin, Ainsley found him sitting alone in the hidden room. She lowered herself down the ladder and sat beside him on the floor.
Tired?
She asked. Exhausted, happy. I don't know what I am. You're exactly who you're supposed to be. She leaned her head on his shoulder. I've been thinking about something. When I was little, before the divorce, you used to play music all the time. I'd come home from school and hear it from the driveway. Then it stopped. The house got quiet. Your mother wanted quiet, Hollis said. She said the music gave her headaches. She wanted control, Ainsley corrected gently. She wanted everything a certain way. And you tried to become what she needed. But it wasn't really you, was it? Hollis thought about those years, the slow suffocation of trying to be practical, responsible, quiet, trying to fit into a life that never quite fit him. No, he admitted, it wasn't me. This is you. This place, this generosity, this belief that beauty matters. That's who my father is. I'm glad I get to see him again. They sat in comfortable silence, surrounded by the crates of records, the physical manifestation of one man's love and another man's redemption. Kent and I have been talking, Ainsley said. We want to establish a fund for the Wainwright House. Not much at first, maybe a few thousand a year, but steady support, so you don't have to worry constantly about keeping the doors open. Ainsley, you don't have to. I know I don't have to. I want to. This matters, Dad, not just to you, but to everyone who walks through that door. People need places like this, where they can stop and breathe and remember what it feels like to be moved by something beautiful. Upstairs, someone started playing What a Wonderful World, the song from the wedding. Ainsley smiled. Come on, one more dance with your old man before I go home to my husband. They climbed back up to find the sitting room nearly empty. Just Mrs. Kepler, Paxton, Kent, and a handful of others remained. The record played softly, Louis Armstrong's voice filling the space with warmth. Hollis and Ainsley danced slowly in the middle of the room. Over her shoulder he saw Paxton watching, something complicated in his expression. Not envy exactly, but recognition maybe, of what had been lost by choosing different paths, but also of what might still be possible. When the song ended, people began gathering their things to leave. They signed the guest book, thanked Hollis, promised to return. Mrs. Kepler was the last to go, kissing his cheek at the door. "It was a good day," she said simply. Margaret and Thaddeus would be proud. Finally, only family remained. Ainsley and Kent said their goodbyes, promising to visit next weekend. Paxton lingered, helping Hollis straighten chairs and pick up stray cups. "This was something," Paxton said, stacking chairs. "Watching people today, seeing what you created. I think I'm starting to understand." "Understand what?" "Why you made the choices you did. I always thought success meant money, security, respect. But watching you today, seeing people's faces when the music played, that's success too. Maybe more real than what I've been chasing." Hollis set down the cups he'd been collecting. "You're not a failure, Paxton. The business struggles don't define you. Maybe not. But they've shown me what does define me, and I don't like it much. I've been so focused on winning that I forgot why I was competing in the first place." He paused. "I'd like to take you up on that bookkeeping offer. Not just to help you, but to help myself. I need to be part of something that isn't about profit margins and market share. You're welcome here, any time." They finished cleaning in companionable silence. When Paxton finally left, Hollis walked through the empty house one more time, turning off lights, checking locks, making sure everything was secure. In the sitting room, he paused by the guest book. 43 names filled the first pages. 43 people who'd chosen to spend part of their day in this space, listening, connecting, being present. He thought about the journey that had brought him here, the divorce, the lost job, the years of struggle, the $1 auction bid that everyone had said was crazy, finding the hidden room, reading Wainwright's letters, making the choice to share rather than sell. Every moment had led to this, a house full of music and memory, doors open to anyone who needed what it offered. His phone buzzed. A text from Ainsley. "Love you, Dad. Today was perfect." Hollis typed back, "Love you too, sweetheart. Thank you for believing in me." He turned off the last light and stood in the darkness for a moment, listening to the house settle around him. It was quiet now, but it was the good kind of quiet. The quiet after celebration, after connection, after something meaningful has happened. Tomorrow, the doors would open again. People would come, listen, share. The music would play, the community would gather, and Hollis Trent, who'd spent years feeling like a failure, would wake up knowing he'd built something that mattered. He locked the front door and walked to his truck, looking back at the villa one more time. The moonlight illuminated its Spanish arches, its terracotta tiles, its windows that had witnessed so much: loss and love, isolation and community, death and rebirth. The house wasn't just livable now, it was alive, and so was he. 3 months later, on a warm June evening, Hollis stood in the courtyard of the Wainwright house and watched the sun set through the trees. The space had become what he'd hoped, a living, breathing place where music connected people across generations and circumstances. The listening library operated 4 days a week now, staffed by volunteers who'd become friends. Maureen Caldwell ran Tuesday and Thursday afternoons with the precision of her librarian days. Mrs. Kepler hosted Saturday mornings, always arriving with fresh-baked goods. Paxton, true to his word, came Wednesday evenings to handle the books and paperwork. He'd found unexpected peace in the routine, in being part of something that asked nothing of him except presence. Regular programming had developed organically. Felix Drummond led a monthly jazz appreciation session. A group of high school music teachers brought students for listening workshops. Otto Brennan started a series on the history of recording technology, using the collection to illustrate how sound preservation had evolved. The guest book had filled its first 100 pages. Hollis read through the entries sometimes, moved by what people wrote. "Finally found a place where I can breathe. My father would have loved this. Thank you for reminding me why music matters." Not everyone who came was elderly. Young people discovered the space too, musicians researching influences, students working on projects, couples looking for something different from the usual entertainment. The collection spoke across decades, proving that beauty wasn't bound by age. Financially, the house survived on a patchwork of small donations, occasional grants, and support from people like Ainsley and Kent, who believed in the mission. It wasn't comfortable, but it was sustainable. Hollis had learned to live on less, and found he needed less than he'd thought. His relationship with Ainsley had deepened in ways he hadn't imagined possible. She visited regularly, sometimes alone, sometimes with Kent. They'd sit and listen to records, talk about life, share comfortable silences. The distance that had marked their relationship for years had dissolved, replaced by genuine connection. She was 3 months pregnant now, glowing with it. When she told him, he'd cried, not sad tears but overwhelmed ones, grateful to be included in this joy, to know he'd be part of his grandchild's life. Even his relationship with Paxton had found new ground. His brother's business had indeed failed, forcing him into bankruptcy and a painful reckoning with his own values. But working at the Wainwright house had given him purpose during the worst of it. They talked now, really talked, in ways they never had before, about failure and success, about what mattered, about the different ways men tried to prove their worth. "I spent 30 years building something I didn't even like," Paxton had admitted one evening while they closed up. "You spent 6 months building something people love. I don't know if that makes you wiser or just luckier, but either way you were right and I was wrong." "We were both right for ourselves," Hollis had replied. "You just took a longer path to get here." This evening, a small crowd had gathered for a special program. Dr. Blackburn was presenting research on the collection's most significant pieces, and people had come from across the state to hear it. The presentation had just ended, and now guests mingled in the courtyard, drinks in hand, talking about music and memory. Hollis moved through the crowd, greeting people, accepting thanks and compliments, with the humility that had become natural to him. He didn't think of himself as special. He'd just been lucky enough to find something worth preserving and brave enough to share it. Ainsley appeared at his elbow, Kent beside her. "Dad, we should go soon. Early day tomorrow, but we wanted to give you this first." She handed him an envelope. Inside was a check, their annual donation to the Wainwright House Fund, larger this year than last. "We can't afford this," Hollis protested. "We can," Kent said firmly, "and we want to. This place gives more than it takes, Hollis. That's rare." After they left, Hollis stood alone for a moment, watching the last light fade from the sky. Inside, he could hear voices, laughter, the clink of glasses. The house was full again, alive with conversation and community. He thought about Professor Wainwright, about the letters and journals, about a man who'd learned too late that beauty locked away was beauty wasted. But his mistake had become Hollis's lesson. His regret had become someone else's redemption. Mrs. Kepler found him standing there. "You look contemplative," she said, "just thinking about how strange life is. A year ago I was fixing toilets and sleeping on a tarp in a ruined house. Now this. Now you've given people something they didn't know they needed," she corrected. "That's not strange. That's grace." The guests began leaving, signing the book on their way out, thanking him again. Dr. Blackburn was the last to go, pausing at the door. "You know what you've created here, don't you?" he said. "It's not just a library or a museum. It's proof that one person's choice to share rather than hoard can change a community. Professor Wainwright would be grateful. But more than that, he'd be happy. This is what he wanted." After everyone had gone, Hollis walked through the empty rooms one final time. He straightened a few chairs, adjusted a photograph on the wall, checked that the turntable was properly covered. Small tasks that had become ritual, that grounded him in the reality of what he'd built. In the sitting room, he paused by the guest book and read the day's entries. Someone had written, "My grandmother brought me here today. She cried during the Billie Holiday record. Afterward, she told me stories about her youth I'd never heard before. Thank you for giving us that gift." Hollis closed the book gently and turned off the lights. Outside, he locked the door and stood for a moment on the porch, looking at the sign that read the Wainwright House. Not his house, not anymore. It belonged to everyone who walked through those doors, everyone who found connection or solace or joy in the music preserved within. He'd bought it for $1 and found something priceless, not in the collection's monetary value, but in its power to bring people together, to remind them that beauty still existed, that taking time to truly listen was an act of rebellion in a world that moved too fast. The villa wasn't just livable, it was alive, filled with purpose and community and love. And Hollis Trent, who'd once believed he'd lost everything that mattered, had discovered that sometimes the smallest investments yield the greatest returns. Not in money, but in meaning. Not in possessions, but in purpose. Not in what you keep, but in what you share. He walked to his truck, already thinking about tomorrow. More visitors would come, more music would play, more stories would be told. The doors would open again, and the house, Professor Wainwright's house, his house, everyone's house, would continue doing what it was always meant to do: give beauty away and watch it multiply.